I still remember that evening clearly. We were all sitting at the dining table, the same table where we had shared birthdays, holidays, and small family victories. My parents looked unusually proud, like they were about to announce something big. My sister Lauren sat beside me, smiling, calm, confident. I had no idea that in a few minutes, everything I believed about my family would quietly fall apart. My father cleared his throat and said they had some good news. He said Lauren's medical school loans were completely paid off. Every dollar. Years of stress, gone just like that. My mother reached for Lauren's hand, her eyes full of pride. They talked about how hard Lauren had worked, how becoming a doctor was a dream worth supporting. I forced a smile and clapped for my sister, because that's what a good brother does. Inside, I was waiting. Waiting for my turn. Waiting to hear that they had something planned for me too. Instead, my dad slid a folder across the table toward me. He said it casually, almost like an afterthought. He explained that there were still some family debts left. Old loans. A balance on the house. A few things they needed help with. He said it made sense for me to take care of them, because I was responsible and stable. Just like that, the celebration ended for me. I'm Ethan. I've always been the reliable one. The one who worked early, saved money, skipped risks. While Lauren chased her dream, I chose the safe path. I told myself that was fine, that families support each other. I believed fairness didn't always mean equal, but it meant loving both children the same way. That night made me realize how wrong I was. No one asked me if I could handle the debt. No one thanked me for the years I had already helped. They didn't mention the times I delayed my own plans to make sure things at home stayed steady. It was as if my sacrifices were invisible, expected, automatic. Lauren avoided my eyes. She didn't say a word. Not a thank you. Not a protest. Just silence. I nodded at the table because I didn't want to ruin the moment. I took the folder because saying no felt like betrayal. But the real betrayal had already happened. It wasn't loud. There was no shouting. It was calm, polite, and carefully explained. That made it hurt more. Later that night, alone in my room, I opened the folder and stared at the numbers. They weren't small. They weren't temporary. They were a future I hadn't chosen. That's when it hit me. My parents didn't see me as a child who deserved support. They saw me as a solution. In that quiet moment, something inside me changed. My trust cracked. My idea of unconditional family love shifted. I didn't know what I would do next, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about knowing where I truly stood in my own family. Looking back, the signs were always there. I just didn't want to see them when I was younger. In our house, there were two roles, clearly defined even if no one ever said them out loud. Lauren was the dream. I was the dependable one. My parents, Richard and Susan Mitchell, treated those roles like they were natural facts, not choices they were making. Lauren talked about big goals from the time she was a teenager. Doctor, surgeon, something impressive. Whenever she said it, my parents' faces lit up. They told relatives about her plans. They encouraged her to focus only on school and her future. If she struggled, it was met with patience and reassurance. She's under pressure, my mom would say. She's meant for great things. My life moved in a quieter direction. I started working early, first part-time, then full-time. It wasn't because I loved working. It was because there was always a reason. The car needed repairs. Bills were tight that month. Someone had to help. My parents praised me too, but in a different way. They called me mature. Reliable. The one they could count on. At the time, I thought that was a compliment. When Lauren needed money for books or exam fees, it was discussed as an investment in her future. When I handed over part of my paycheck, it was treated as help I was simply supposed to give. No long talks. No thanks that lasted more than a moment. Just a nod and the expectation that I'd keep doing it. I watched this pattern repeat for years. Lauren was protected from stress so she could focus. I was exposed to stress so others wouldn't have to feel it. If I ever looked tired or frustrated, I was reminded that I could handle it. That I was strong. That not everyone was built the same way. Family decisions always landed heavier on me. If something needed fixing, I figured it out. If emotions ran high, I calmed things down. I became the buffer without realizing the cost. Meanwhile, Lauren was allowed to be fragile, ambitious, and fully supported. I didn't resent her back then. I told myself this was how families worked. Everyone had a role. Mine just happened to involve giving more and asking for less. I believed that balance would come later, that one day my parents would look back and recognize what I had carried for so long. But imbalance doesn't suddenly appear in adulthood. It grows quietly over years of small moments. Moments where one child is lifted and the other is leaned on. By the time we were both adults, the pattern was so normal to them that they didn't question it anymore. What hurt most wasn't the work or the sacrifice. It was realizing that my parents never saw it as something that needed to be repaid. To them, this was simply who I was supposed to be. And that understanding followed me into adulthood, shaping everything that came next. When Lauren got into medical school, the house filled with excitement in a way I had never seen before. There were phone calls to relatives, special dinners, and proud smiles that didn't fade for weeks. My parents talked about her acceptance like it was a shared family victory. I was genuinely happy for her. I knew how hard she had worked, and I wanted to support her the same way everyone else did. Support, for me, didn't come with speeches or praise. It came quietly, behind the scenes. When the tuition numbers arrived and the loans weren't enough, my parents came to me first. They asked if I could co-sign, just to help things move faster. They said it was temporary and low risk. I agreed, telling myself this was what family did for each other. As school started, the costs kept coming. There were books, exam fees, unexpected housing issues, and small emergencies that always seemed to happen at the worst times. Whenever something went wrong, I was the backup plan. I sent money without being asked twice. I adjusted my budget. I worked extra hours. Lauren focused on surviving medical school, and I focused on making sure she could. During this time, I had plans of my own. Ideas I kept putting off. Moving to a new city. Going back to school. Starting something that belonged only to me. Each time I got close, something else came up. Another need. Another promise that this phase wouldn't last forever. My parents reassured me often. They told me once Lauren was settled, things would change. They said they wouldn't forget what I was doing. "We'll make it right one day," my dad told me more than once. I held on to those words. They made the sacrifices feel temporary instead of permanent. They gave meaning to the delays in my own life. I believed there would be a moment when everything balanced out, when the help I gave would be acknowledged and returned in some fair way. Lauren rarely knew the details of what I was doing. And maybe that was intentional. She was under pressure, and I didn't want to add guilt to her already heavy load. When she thanked me, it was brief and tired, and I told her not to worry about it. I convinced myself that understanding didn't need to be spoken out loud. Years passed like this. Her path moved forward, step by step. Mine stayed paused, always waiting for the right time. I didn't complain, because I trusted the people who raised me. I trusted that parents wouldn't let one child carry too much for too long. Looking back, medical school didn't just change Lauren's life. It changed mine too. It quietly set the rules for who would be supported and who would support. And because I believed the promises I was given, I never questioned how much I was giving up in the process. The dinner was supposed to be simple. Nothing fancy, just the four of us sitting together like we had so many times before. My mom cooked Lauren's favorite meal, and my dad opened a bottle of wine he usually saved for special occasions. I should have known something important was coming. The mood was too careful, too planned. Halfway through the meal, my dad stood up slightly from his chair, holding his glass. He said this dinner was to celebrate Lauren. He talked about her long nights, her sacrifices, and how proud they were to call her a doctor. Then he said they had decided to pay off all of her medical school loans. He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, like the end of a story everyone was expecting. Lauren looked shocked at first, then emotional. My mom hugged her. There were tears, smiles, and relief all around the table. I smiled too, because it felt wrong not to. I told myself this was a happy moment, and I didn't want to ruin it. But inside, I felt something tighten in my chest. When the excitement settled, my dad reached down and picked up a folder from beside his chair. He didn't look at Lauren when he did it. He slid it across the table toward me. His voice dropped, becoming practical and calm. He said there were still some family obligations to handle. Debts that didn't disappear just because one chapter had closed. He explained that there was a second mortgage on the house and a few other balances that needed to be managed. He said it made sense for me to take responsibility for them. He talked about stability, good credit, and trust. The words came out smooth, like this decision had already been made long before that night. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were numbers, terms, and signatures waiting for mine. I realized this wasn't a discussion. It was an expectation. No one asked if I agreed. No one asked how it would affect me. They had already decided where the weight would land. I looked at Lauren, hoping she might say something. She didn't. She stared at the table, quiet, letting the moment pass. My mom avoided my eyes. My dad kept explaining, as if details would make it easier to accept. That was the moment it fully hit me. The celebration wasn't just about rewarding Lauren. It was also about transferring responsibility to me. One child was being released from burden. The other was being handed more. I felt small sitting there, holding that folder. Not angry, not loud, just deeply aware that something had broken. This wasn't about helping anymore. This was about being chosen last, again, without anyone even realizing they were doing it. I didn't speak right away. That night, I went home with the folder still sitting unopened beside me. I barely slept. My thoughts kept looping, not around the numbers, but around the feeling that my place in the family had been clearly defined without my consent. By the next day, I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I asked my parents if we could talk. Just the three of us at first. I kept my voice calm because I didn't want to fight. I told them I wasn't angry about helping in the past. I said I understood supporting Lauren through school. What I couldn't understand was why everything else was now being placed on me without a conversation. My mom, Susan, reacted first. Her face tightened, and she asked why I was making this about myself. She said families don't keep score. She said Lauren worked hard and deserved relief, and that I should be proud to help. When I tried to explain how heavy this felt, she cut me off and said I was being selfish. That word stayed with me. My dad, Richard, stayed quieter. When he finally spoke, his tone was gentle but firm. He said I had always been strong. He reminded me of how well I handled pressure in the past. He said they trusted me because they knew I wouldn't let the family fall apart. To him, this wasn't a burden. It was proof of confidence. I asked them why trust always seemed to come with a cost only I had to pay. I asked why Lauren was never asked to share the weight. The room went quiet. That's when Lauren walked in and joined us. She listened without saying much. I hoped she would speak up. Even a small acknowledgement would have meant something. Instead, she thanked our parents for everything they had done for her. She said she wouldn't have made it without them. Her voice shook with emotion, but it wasn't directed at me. That silence hit harder than anything else. Not the accusations. Not the expectations. Just the quiet acceptance of a system that worked in her favor. In that moment, I realized she was comfortable with how things were. Whether she meant to hurt me or not didn't matter. The result was the same. I left the conversation feeling drained. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't demanded anything unreasonable. But somehow, I was still made to feel like the problem. Like asking for fairness was a flaw. Walking away, I understood something clearly for the first time. Being calm didn't protect me. Being strong didn't earn me care. It only made it easier for others to place more weight on my shoulders and call it love. After that conversation, I didn't make a big announcement. I didn't threaten anyone or give ultimatums. I simply stopped. I stopped sending money. I stopped saying yes to every request. I stopped rearranging my life to make things easier for everyone else. It was a quiet decision, but it was the hardest one I had ever made. I moved out not long after. It wasn't dramatic. I packed my things, found a small place of my own, and started paying only for what belonged to me. For the first time in years, my paycheck stayed in my account. That alone felt strange, like I was doing something wrong even though I wasn't. At first, I didn't explain much. I told my parents I needed space to focus on my own life. That I needed to get stable in a way that didn't involve carrying everyone else's problems. They didn't take it well. My mom called often, her voice full of disappointment. She asked how I could turn my back on family. She reminded me of everything they had done for me growing up. The guilt came in waves, carefully wrapped in concern. My dad's response was different. He grew distant. When we spoke, his tone was cold and short, like I had failed some unspoken test. Requests didn't stop right away. They just changed shape. Small favors. Temporary help. Just this once. Each time I said no, the silence between us grew heavier. I could feel their frustration even when they didn't say it directly. Lauren didn't reach out much at all. When she did, the conversations were surface level and careful. It was clear she didn't want to get involved. Her life was moving forward, and mine was finally starting to, too. Rebuilding my life wasn't easy. I had to face how much I had delayed for others. I set new goals, made a budget that worked for me, and started thinking about what I actually wanted. Some days, the guilt still followed me. I questioned myself constantly. Was I being unfair? Was I abandoning them? But with time, something else grew stronger than the guilt. Peace. The more distance I created, the clearer my mind became. I slept better. I felt lighter. I realized how heavy the role I had been playing really was. My parents' reactions didn't soften. The warmth faded, replaced by formality. Holidays became awkward or were skipped altogether. It hurt, but it also confirmed something important. Their approval had always come with conditions. Choosing myself cost me closeness, comfort, and the illusion of balance. But it gave me something I had never had before. Control over my own life. And once I felt that, I knew I couldn't go back. A few months passed, and for the first time, I wasn't involved in the daily problems of my family. Life felt quieter. Then the calls started. At first, they were small check-ins that didn't feel real. Missed calls with no messages. Short texts asking how I was doing. I kept my replies polite but brief. I could sense something underneath the words, something they weren't saying yet. Then the tone changed. My mom called one afternoon sounding stressed. She talked quickly, jumping from one issue to another. Bills were higher than expected. Something with the house needed fixing. She mentioned how expensive everything had become. She never directly asked for help, but the expectation sat clearly between every sentence. When I didn't offer anything, the call ended awkwardly. My dad followed up a few days later. His voice was tight, controlled. He talked about responsibility and family pulling together during hard times. He reminded me how things used to work. Not once did he ask how I was managing. Not once did he acknowledge why I had stepped back. Around the same time, I heard through relatives that Lauren was struggling too. The job she worked so hard for wasn't what she expected. Long hours. High pressure. Mistakes that carried real consequences. For the first time, the protection around her seemed to crack. The weight she had been spared before was finally pressing down on her. Instead of bringing us closer, these struggles pushed expectations back toward me. More calls came in. Some were gentle. Others carried frustration. None of them came with accountability. No one said they understood my decision. No one apologized for assuming I would always be there to catch them. One evening, my phone rang again. I stared at the screen as my mom's name lit up. I knew what the call would be about. I knew the conversation before it even started. And for the first time, I didn't feel panic or guilt. I felt tired. So I let it ring. That choice felt heavier than any payment I had ever made. Ignoring family goes against everything I was taught. But answering would have meant stepping back into a role I had worked hard to leave. The calls kept coming for a while. Messages followed. Hints turned into frustration. Then, slowly, the noise faded. They were forced to deal with problems they had once handed to me without thinking. I didn't feel satisfied watching things fall apart. There was no joy in knowing they were struggling. But there was clarity. I finally understood that being needed was not the same as being valued. Silence became my boundary. And in that silence, I learned that consequences don't always arrive with drama. Sometimes, they arrive quietly, when the person who always carried the weight finally puts it down. Eventually, my parents asked to meet in person. They said we needed to talk things through like adults. I agreed, not because I felt guilty, but because I knew avoiding the conversation forever wouldn't bring closure. This time, I came prepared. I didn't come to argue. I didn't come to defend myself emotionally. I brought documents. Bank statements. Records of payments. Old emails and agreements that showed how often I had stepped in and how much I had covered over the years. Things I had never kept for leverage before, only for my own tracking. We sat in the living room, the same one where so many quiet decisions had been made without me. My dad started talking first. He spoke about stress, about how hard things had become, about family stepping up when needed. I let him finish. Then I laid the papers out on the table. I spoke slowly and clearly. I explained that these weren't opinions or feelings. They were facts. I showed them how much I had contributed, how long I had been doing it, and how those contributions had affected my own life. My mom tried to interrupt, but I kept going. I said I was done taking responsibility for debts that were never mine to begin with. I said I would no longer co-sign, cover, or absorb financial problems created by decisions I didn't make. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply stated my boundary. The room went quiet. Not an uncomfortable pause, but a deep, heavy silence. For the first time, they had nothing to counter with. No emotional argument. No reminder of who I was supposed to be. The numbers spoke louder than any story they could tell. Lauren sat across from me, looking at the papers. She didn't speak. Her expression wasn't defensive or grateful. It was thoughtful, almost unsettled. I realized she was seeing the full picture for the first time. My dad finally said I didn't have to bring proof into a family matter. I told him I did, because without it, my reality was always easy to dismiss. This wasn't about punishment. It was about clarity. When the meeting ended, nothing was fixed. No one apologized. But something important had shifted. The unspoken agreement that I would always step in was broken. I left that day feeling steady. Not proud. Not angry. Just certain. For once, the story wasn't being shaped around expectations placed on me. I had spoken for myself, backed by truth, and refused to carry what was never mine. After that meeting, there was one more conversation that couldn't be avoided. It wasn't about money this time. It was about everything underneath it. We sat together again, and I could feel the tension before anyone spoke. This time, I didn't bring papers. I brought honesty. I told them I wasn't there to argue or fix anything. I said I just needed them to hear the truth. I explained that what broke our family wasn't stress or bad timing. It was favoritism. Quiet, repeated favoritism that shaped every decision. I told them how it felt growing up knowing one child was protected while the other was prepared to carry the load. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse them of being bad people. I told them impact mattered more than intent. I said being called strong over and over didn't feel like praise anymore. It felt like permission to ignore my limits. I explained that love shouldn't come with conditions or roles that never change. My mom looked hurt and defensive at the same time. She said they never meant to make me feel less important. I told her meaning well didn't erase the outcome. My dad stayed quiet, staring at the floor, listening in a way he never had before. Lauren finally spoke. Her voice was soft. She said she hadn't realized how much I had taken on. She said she thought things were just handled. When she looked at me, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before, shame. Not anger. Not denial. Regret. But it came too late. I told them I wasn't asking for apologies or promises. I said I had already made my choice. I explained that I needed distance, not to punish them, but to protect myself. I said I couldn't keep being part of a dynamic that only worked when I stayed silent. There was nothing left to say after that. No dramatic ending. No sudden understanding. Just quiet acceptance that things wouldn't go back to how they were. I stood up, thanked them for listening, and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I left with my dignity intact, knowing I had finally spoken the truth without anger or fear. As I drove away, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Some truths don't fix what's broken. They simply make it clear why walking away is the only honest choice left. After everything, I realized that revenge wasn't about yelling or making anyone feel guilty. It wasn't about punishing Lauren or my parents. True revenge was much quieter. It was in refusing to carry burdens that were never mine. It was in setting boundaries and finally living my life for myself. I started small. I organized my finances, paying only for what I had agreed to. I created routines that supported my own growth, not someone else's convenience. I applied for opportunities one had put off for years, started planning trips I had always postponed, and even took time to enjoy the little things I had ignored. For the first time, my life wasn't dictated by the expectations or debts of others. The freedom wasn't instant. There were moments when guilt crept in, reminding me of everything I had done in the past. I thought about my parents' disappointment, Lauren's struggles, and all the ways I had sacrificed. But I kept reminding myself that carrying what was never mine didn't make me loving or loyal, it made me invisible in my own life. Letting go wasn't selfish, it was necessary. I also stopped waiting for apologies. They might never come. I stopped hoping Lauren would acknowledge all I had done or that my parents would see their favoritism clearly. Waiting for validation had been a trap I had fallen into for years. Instead, I focused on actions I could control, my own choices, my own happiness, my own future. I learned that family doesn't always betray you with shouting or drama. Sometimes, the betrayal is quiet. It comes in decisions made without asking, in responsibilities shifted without discussion, in smiles that hide the truth. Recognizing that early is what allows you to protect yourself. Living free didn't mean I forgot. I remembered every time I stayed silent, every favor I gave, every expectation I carried. But I remembered it as lessons, not as chains. Those memories became fuel to make different choices, to be present for myself first, and to build the life I wanted without resentment. Now, when I think about my family, I feel neither hate nor anger. I feel clarity. I understand the hard truth, loving yourself sometimes means stepping away from people who have always depended on you in ways that weren't fair. Freedom isn't about burning bridges, it's about crossing them carefully, knowing which ones are safe to walk and which ones are not. In the end, I am no longer the person who bends to silent expectations. I am someone who decides my limits, someone who values my own life above inherited burdens. That is my revenge. That is my peace. That is my freedom.